Hello, my name is Jonathan Dupuy, and today I'll be presenting to you how working from home affected the health and productivity of workers. So, how did we get here? First, I'll be telling you how we got to the point where working from home became important. Then, I will be discussing the pros and cons of working from home. And after that, I'll go over some of the mental and physical health effects people experienced and how they experienced them across different demographics. I will be doing the same for productivity as well. So how did we get here? Well, no one is exactly sure how COVID-19 started, but we do know that it was first identified in Wuhan, China in 2019. And that photo there shows you the location of Wuhan City within China. Now, the reason COVID was so important for all of this is because that COVID was pretty infectious, and there's a good chance that when a person gets infected, that they're asymptomatic. Now, asymptomatic means that they have no signs of being infected whatsoever. But even with all of that, even if someone does get infected and they eventually show signs of being infected, it can take a while for that to appear, several days in fact. So these two things combined allowed COVID to spread across the world very quickly, especially in dense urban environments and poorer areas. So because of all of this, companies had to figure out how to adapt to the situation, because if all of their people get sick, they can't work. So they got around that by sending them to work at home. Now, the pros of working at home, of course, there's less chance of spreading an illness. If you're sick at home, you can't spread it to your coworkers, and if your coworkers are sick, they can't give it to you. Also, if your symptoms are mild enough, even if you do get sick, you can still work, albeit at a reduced capacity. Now, this situation may also be more comfortable for some people, as you can customize your workspace to however you want, as long as it's work appropriate, and you also won't have to deal with any potential drama that your coworkers might give you. There's also more flexibility in your schedule, because you do not have to commute to and from work. You don't necessarily have to start or leave at the same time you would normally. You can start earlier if you wish, or you can go for longer. It's not as important. There's also decreased costs for doing this. If you're not commuting at work, you're not having to pay for more gas, and there's less wear and tear on your vehicle, so you'll have to replace parts less often. And if you have a dependent, like a child or an elderly parent, you won't have to get professional care for them because you're still at home and you can help them if they need it. Now, for some of the cons of doing this, working at home means that you're not in as much direct communication with your bosses. So they may not realize your potential because they're just not thinking about you. You're out of sight, out of mind. Also, you are more susceptible to distractions while working at home, especially if you have a dependent. If they need help with something, you're there. So, they're going to bother you about work. If you're not very tech savvy, you may run into some issues with your computer. And there's only so much an IT department can do remotely. Some issues, they have to be physically there with the computers to be able to help you, and that's just it's not possible if you're at home. There's also less effective communication in the workplace. Being at home, you can use things like Zoom or Skype to talk to them, and they do mitigate that, but it's not as effective as talking face-to-face with someone. So for the mental health side of things, people reported an increased satisfaction with their environment because they can customize it, because they don't have to deal with people they don't want to have to deal with, and they can spend more time with their families. But at the same time, they also experienced increased workload expectations. This was due to the flexibility of scheduling. You can work for longer, right? So they'll give you more work. But again, with the decreased communication with workers, if you've worked with a group of people for a significant amount of time, you may become friends with them. And since you're working at home, it's difficult to spend time with those people. So some people did report experiencing feelings of isolation and loneliness. Different demographics, they felt largely positive about working from home. However, there were some negatives. Example being that men generally reported having higher levels of work exhaustion, and women who worked from home reported having more stress than women who did not work from home. The same trend was true for men. So for physical health, there was reported a mild decrease in physical activity. It's because when you're in an office and your boss needs to speak to you, they will call you to your office, so you have to get up and physically walk over there. And while you're working with your coworkers, if you need to show them a paper or anything really, you have to get up and physically bring that to them. But if they're working from home and they're using Zoom or whatever, you don't need to get up and do anything. You can just call them or email it to them. At the same time, there was a reported increase in food intake. This is due to the fact if you have to buy your lunch from your workplace's cafeteria, you no longer have to do that at home. You don't have to go into a special room for it. You can just grab something out of your fridge, and you don't need to pay for what's in your fridge. You've already bought it. So the temptation to eat was much stronger. These two things combined produced many new health issues for all sorts of people, and there's no real consistency on what these health issues were. And that's what we'll be taken care of on this next slide here. So women are reported having many more health issues than men did. As you can see here, the majority of women actually reported 2 or more new health issues, 51%, whereas only 28% of women reported having no new health issues. With men, 44% of men reported having 0 new health issues. So there's a pretty big difference there. Now, across income brackets, regardless of gender, lower income brackets reported many more new health issues than those at the higher end. With people who made less than $50,000 per year, 46% reported 2 or more new health issues, whereas with people who made more than $150,000, 42% of them reported 0 new health issues. So the trend is moving from 2 or more with less than 50,000 towards 0 with people who make more than 150,000. This is because wealthier people typically have better access to health care and better access to healthier food, because healthier food is generally more expensive than junk food. Productivity was affected by many different factors. These are just some of the more important ones. The inability to retrieve data, especially for people who are not very good with computers, was a big factor here. Most companies reported a mild negative effect because of that. Poor setups at home were also pretty important. A lot of people weren't very used to working from home. Most occupations don't require you to do that. And poor communication was especially big, especially with clients. clients already aren't very good communicators, and working from home exacerbated that significantly. In fact, um, Company A here reported a score of -1 for clients, and the farther away from zero you get, the worse it is. So, moving on from that, workers reported having increased mental and physical fatigue. If you're not used to working from home, it's going to take you a while to get used to it, and it'll drain you more than it would otherwise. So across demographics, people with dependents scored worse than those who did not have them. These numbers here are for women without children, and these here are for women with children. And women with children always scored worse than women without children. And this trend continued for everyone with dependents. Now, people who are older than 30 years had worse performance with working from home than those who were younger than that. People who are people less than 30 years old are practically born with a cell phone in their hands, so they're much more used to technology like this, and they're also less rigid in structure with how they do things. So older people had a harder time adjusting because of that. And finally, different occupations were affected by working from home differently. For example, programmers, they often work from home regardless of a pandemic. My father, for example, he is a programmer, and he's been working from home for as long as I can remember. So someone with occupations like that, they're not going to have too much trouble transitioning. Whereas someone who's, say, a sales associate, they might because they're not used to that. So in conclusion, working from home became important because a pandemic forced people to work from home or get sick. And there's several pros and cons. Pros being that it's just generally more satisfactory for people to work from home, but it does cause some health issues. For example, with mental health, they experience some increased levels of stress. With physical health, they generally did worse because they're eating more often, they're not moving around as much. And for productivity, technology did get in the way, and age and dependence made things worse for people. This concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for watching.